Hello, everyone. Welcome to another free live session. We have adored doing these, and this one I'm really excited about. I was feeling a bit nervous, as I said to Kirst this morning, just because I want everyone to be aware that gut symptoms are definitely my vibe, and I work with them a lot, but I would not call myself a gut dietitian because there is so many things I have not niched into this area, and we will definitely touch on referring on for that very reason. But with All Things Academy, we really love to dig deep into the meaningful stuff, the practical elements of working with someone with gut symptoms without having to go really nitty gritty into the science aspect, because the science is so important, and we really urge you to always go, further into that and do a whole lot of PD in that, so you understand all the intricacies of gut health and gut symptoms. But with this in mind, we will also go through and appreciate that we've only got, 20 minutes or so together to chat through gut health, and then leave plenty of time for questions. And if anyone's met me before, you'll know that I'll fill that time no drama. So this is a very chilled area. So if you do have a question, please pop up your hand and yell out. And those on Instagram, please feel free to type it and I'll review at the end. So I guess the first thing that I want to really, note down with gut health is it's very connected with mental, emotional symptoms as well. So I think one thing that we often feel like it isn't in our lane, or we're hesitant to go too deep in this. Hey, Maddie, is really about that connection between the brain and gut. And sometimes we can be like, well, I'm going to do all things nutrition and I'll pay attention to all the gut symptoms, but it's out of my lane to talk too much around this person's mental health or mental state and how that might be impacting it. And we are absolutely here to challenge that, because the more we can listen and understand and appreciate that person in front of us as a whole person and not just their gut symptoms, the better we will be in approaching how we work with someone with gut symptoms as they come to us for help. So I guess like that relationship is how I guess we'll set the foundation for today, but it will be a really core part of what we chat through. So I guess the biggest thing, and I've already mentioned it in terms of listening, is communication is more than just talking. Communication is absolutely listening, and I would say listening is more important than talking. And when someone comes to you with gut symptoms, it's really important to appreciate that that person may have been through these for a while. They may have talked to many different people. They may be in a state of distress around their gut symptoms or embarrassment and shame, but also they may have, you might be their last port of call. They might have tried all different things with their food. They may have talked to all different types of people to try and get an answer, and they'll be really desperate for a fix, or at least be holding hope that you can offer that fix. I think the really tricky thing with gut symptoms, though, is it takes a lot of time, and it can be really distressing and really hard to actually input a lot of these things, and there's no really quick fixes. So setting that up from the get-go when you're conversing with that client is really important, and just validating how frustrating it is, validating how distressing it is, or how much it's intruding into their life or their overall well-being or self-confidence is really, really important. And if you've got your own individual experience, making sure you can hold space for that if it comes up, but I don't think it needs to be something that you feel like you've got to share within that conversation, only if it's appropriate. And most of the time you can hold a whole lot of empathy without needing to share your individual experience. Because everyone is so different in gut symptoms, and there isn't one thing of like, oh, well, this worked for me, and that's probably what they've heard a lot of already. So when you're listening, it's really important to grasp onto the symptoms, but alongside listening to the symptoms, also getting a whole profile and timeline of when these started, what happened when these started, what was happening in their life, alongside the frequency of symptoms, and also any patterns that you can come across. So getting a full picture on the clinical side is really important, but also getting a full picture on the life side is really important too. So talking around, life circumstances, stressors like mental health, changes in jobs, moving, injury, all these types of things are so, so important. And gaining that information while also then painting a picture of, okay, what are my thoughts here? What could it be? What are those symptoms aligning with? And you don't have to blurt all those out. They can absolutely be things that you are noting down internally or noting down in your notes, but try not to like place a whole lot of clinical terms on top of someone of like, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. Like that, they are already probably aware of all the things it could be. They've probably been to Dr. Google a lot. And your role is to actually calm them and slow that down and allow them to feel hope, but also confidence in you and building that rapport. So when we are going through these symptoms, one of the biggest things that you want to do early on is start to rule out the pathological causes. So like IBD, for example, celiac disease, those things that need testing and they require really set standards of testing to be able to get a validated test result. You want to do that for a multitude of reasons. They can be a really severe a pathological cause that we want to get onto early. But also, if we start removing foods, we could accidentally stop them being able to be testing for that when we actually need to test it if we then find out it hasn't done anything. For example, if you start removing, let's say, gluten in the celiac disease example, and they suddenly have a reduction in symptoms, we're like, oh, we fixed it. They actually then don't know that they need to be 100% gluten if it actually ended up being celiac disease. And also, they'll be very hesitant to reintroduce gluten to test for celiac disease if they're now feeling better. So to do that early on and to give them the pathway of options in celiac disease testing is really important. Kirsten, while I think of it, we can put that little decision tree within the recording email as well, just to help with even just that as an example. But while you're ruling out pathological causes, it can take some time, right? They've got to make a doctor's appointment. They've got to see specialists at times. They've got to get testing done. They might have to do challenges with gluten, all those types of things. There's lots you can be doing at the same time. And so you can be starting to think about that low-hanging fruit. So really thinking about, okay, are there obvious causes that aren't pathological? That's all being tested for, and let's rule that out first. But while we're doing that, what are the other things that could be leading to this? Have they traveled recently? What's the environment been like? What are they choosing? What's the timing, frequency, those types of things? Because you're not maybe just doing the daily gut symptoms, you might be doing exercise induced as well. So lots of things that you can start collecting and start working with and educating that client on at the same time. The biggest emphasis is on curiosity. So really pulling that string, starting to get information, but also always giving those things of like, okay, we're going to try this. Oh, gosh, I think of this client that we've had challenges with gut wise for so long now. And it's been a really, really big challenge on my end because it's been a sway of like them buying in, them not buying in, differences in like how they describe their symptoms, all these types of things, and really tricky to find a trigger, but really tricky to actually find a pattern as well. And in that, it's really important, like if you're trialing something to make sure, like say, for example, FODMAPs, and you're like, okay, we're going to try FODMAPs. This is what it is. This is what it's about. And ensuring they know that it's not a forever plan, first of all, is really important. But also navigating how hard it is really important too. It's very restricting. It can feel really conflicting within their family environment, their family home, their normal food. And it can be really time consuming to actually reinvent what they're eating each day for a short amount of time, while also navigating their symptoms and their whole life around that as well. And the whole time, this may not actually work. And so they're doing all this effort with no guarantee, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm going to ask you to throw everything out that you've been doing food wise, switch it all to this, and just, if this doesn't work, we'll have other things. But it's like, okay, but this is going to take a few weeks at least, at the very least. And even if it doesn't work, like it's a really big bind. So just validating how frustrating that is, validating how much time it is, and ensuring that everything you do is done with it in mind. Like, how do I make this easier on the person that I'm asking this of? Because you're asking something really big and really significant in their lives most often. And so it comes back to that behavior change. Is you're asking someone to change behavior very quickly, and also setting rules and prescribing, which is also very frictiony. So anywhere that you can, for example, if you can get a full normal day of that person, or a whole, like, a week ideas of what foods they love, what they generally choose, and then create a menu or ideas or inspiration based upon that, that really just aims to add in or swap where needed, rather than giving them a whole new way of eating, is much more facilitating like of that smaller behavior change than something much bigger that's asking them to cook differently, shop differently, and do a whole lot of things differently in their home environment, but also often work environment as well. So just really like make sure they're a part of that journey, get their consent, and really make sure that it's part of their decision to do this and not something you're just telling them they have to do. And really ensuring they're aware of like all the different options that's available to them to navigate this and what that might mean to them. So yeah, education, but also acknowledging how hard it is really important. Before this morning, Kirsten and I were talking about this, and one thing that I think we should all do is give it a go ourselves of like, okay, you know what, let's eat low FODMAP for a week and see how that feels. How does it go when I eat out? How do I go shopping? What does my normal food now change into? How hard do I find it? Like, actually experiencing this for yourself is really important. And it's the same, when you're working with someone with celiac disease, for example. What are we asking of these people? How hard is it? How much more do we have to spend at the shop? How much more time do we have to spend at the shop looking at labels? How do we go eating out? How does that feel? Is it foreign? Is it anxiety producing? All these different things are really important for us to experience, or at least listen to the story to empathize with, because it's a really big shift. And I think on top of that, we've got to be cautious with our language. And this is similar to what we were just going through, right? Is our language is very much around, you can have this, you can't have this. This is good, this is bad. This will cause symptoms, this won't cause symptoms. And if we think about all the things that we recommend not doing when it comes to relationship with food, we tend to do it when it turns to gut management. So being really aware of how we use that language around food, can we do so in a way that doesn't bring in morality? Or, I guess, demonization of foods, which often will happen, particularly when we're talking intolerance and allergies, is a really important thing. Even if that feels a little bit foreign to you, of like, I don't even know how to do that. How often do you give people a list of the foods they can't eat in a special diet? How often do we give people a pure list of what they can eat? And really enable, oh my gosh, I'm empowered. I can see foods on here that I can eat, that I love, that I can include. So making sure that the information we're giving isn't just what they can't do, but so much more focused on what they can do and what they do have control of is really important in that mindset. Because, if FODMAPs, for example, I keep bringing up because it's so common for us to work with, there's a lot of foods on there they can't have. And there's a lot of foods on there that they would identify as what they would refer to as health foods, or foods they thought they were doing well at, and it can feel really, really conflicting and really limiting. So, just seeing how do you present that information, what language do you use around those foods, and how absolute are you around that language as well. One thing that I should probably cover, because I've just touched on it very briefly, is where this all relates to disordered eating and eating. Sorry if you can hear that. That is my dog knocking at the door. Is just eating disorder and disordered eating symptoms, and how this comes to play when we're looking at gut health and gut symptoms. So it's a bit of a chicken or the egg scenario here, right? Because we've not. So good. I'm so glad they want to break in. I must be talking on some really great stuff. Is we can't always facilitate when did disordered eating symptoms happen versus if they happened as a result of needing to manage gut symptoms, or had the gut symptoms happened as a result of their disordered eating. So where this comes to play is that we know that disordered eating and eating disorder, especially in the realms of restriction, but also in binge eating, can create gut symptoms and uncomfortable gut symptoms, whether that is upper GI or lower GI or a bit of both. And so there's some things that then they start cutting out more and more foods to try and manage those symptoms, or the other way around, they've got gut symptoms and that leads them to restrict or feel morality around food or fear around food, and a whole lot of shame and guilt around food as well. So if you are someone who doesn't systematically review and at least screen, even if it's just a few questions around disordered eating or eating disorder with your clients, even if you don't suspect anything's happening and they've come to you for gut symptoms, why would I be reviewing for disordered eating? I highly recommend, because that will change how you then proceed with your recommendations, the type of recommendations you give, and the language and things that you do in terms of presenting those or moving forward. And if we're looking at disordered eating, eating disorder as well, we're also talking around the risk of low energy availability all those symptoms of relative energy deficiency in sport. And please don't feel like just because I've said sport, I'm talking athletes. We are talking underfueling. And underfueling can happen no matter what the level of exercise is on those humans. And it can be something that absolutely changes how the gut works and the speed of that gut processing as well. And so when we're looking at gut health, if we've got suspected underfueling, that may or may not be connected to disordered eating or eating disorder. It needs to be part of the conversation, because a lot of the times if someone is feeling bloated, they are also feeling really self-aware of their gut symptoms and how their stomach looks. And there might also be body image tied to that. But also when you've got gut symptoms and you're feeling really uncomfortable around food and after you've eaten, you'll be more likely to restrict as well. So again, it's that chicken and the egg scenario where sometimes gut symptoms lead someone to undereat, and then sometimes undereating leads to gut symptoms, and sometimes they're just together and exacerbating each other. And so being really aware of that need to fuel adequately and absolutely having that as a tool in your toolbox to alleviate gut symptoms is so valid. And I think it's overlooked a lot of time because we end up starting to restrict or look at food and we're like, actually, the problem is that you're not eating enough. It's not actually that there's set foods. Your body is just in a really stressed state, or at a efficient state, if you like, where we've got a suppression of that gut mobility. And so navigating those things is really, really important. And that's why that full picture of that person is so important from the get-go, if you can, and if you have an opportunity and some time to do that in the initial or before the initial appointment even, it really is a really great way to navigate that. The next thing, lastly, always refer on. Like if you've got a complex gut symptom or a client that you just cannot work out, or it's becoming really stressful for you, or you feel like it's gone past your lane of expertise, there are incredible gut-specific dietitians out there that are absolutely amazing at their job and worthwhile in referring to. And please don't see it as a negative on you or your value. That person will respect you so much more for knowing where your expertise lies and where it doesn't, that if you kind of, fumble over it and say the wrong thing or lead them astray and don't actually get the result. So I see referral as a powerful piece of who we are as practitioners and not in a negative at all. We cannot be specialized in everything, and everyone is great at some areas and not great at others, and that is completely okay. But making sure we collaborate as a team in the profession is only going to elevate who we are and how we're seen as well. So yeah, please don't feel like that is a negative of like I failed that person or I failed myself, because that is definitely not the case. And I think sometimes we try and rush in and help everyone without actually going, am I the best person for this? And that can be something you talk about from the very get-go of like, oh wow, that is a really big thing to be going through. I'm so sorry these are your experiences. I'm going to let you know that this is where I am great and I can absolutely support you. But if this doesn't work, or if this becomes more complex, please know that this isn't my full area of expertise, and I know exactly who I'd love to refer you on to. So you can navigate that from the start if you do feel uncomfortable with how much they're sharing or how complex the story is that they're sharing as well. And now we're going to open up for questions if anyone has any. Nailed it.
Yeah, covered so much, Alicia. There's not many questions.
I'm sure that's never the case.
I can throw one at you, Leash, if you like. I was just thinking like tips with those patients that maybe are flagging with some disordered eating, and perhaps like thinking that stress might be a bit of an influence on some of their symptoms. I just find from personal experience, sometimes they're really set on food being the answer. And if you perhaps try and suggest that might be more psych or meditation or one of those other kind of paths may be more beneficial, kind of navigating that conversation if there's that little bit of resistance with trying to buy into perhaps some other strategies.
Yeah, it can be so vulnerable, right? Because they've come to you as a dietitian going, we're going to talk about food. This is a really safe space. They're definitely not going to help to talk to me about how I'm going. And then when you talk to them how they're going and ask them how they're going, it can bring up a lot, and it's not necessarily expected within that clinic when they come in, which is always a little bit difficult for them to chat through. So I think there's a couple of bits. It might be as well, like if we think about that readiness to change piece, is that often someone is ready to change when it comes to food because they'll do anything to fix this, but not necessarily ready to change or even consider change could be a piece that they need to consider when it comes to mental health. So it's totally okay to be conflicted within there and really normal and common, but it's about going, okay, well, maybe they're ready to change their food. And maybe there's some things I can doing in the background to build rapport, build trust, and build a little bit of buy-in while I keep kind of nurturing this idea of, considering their mental health, where they're at the moment, their stress levels, anxiety, to make sure that it's part of it. So one thing I do, even if that's new to the conversation, is when I get them to do a symptom diary. Sorry, I lost my Instagram. I'm also just asking them, can you just place how you feel, within that symptom diary? And it's really not imposing. It's getting their consent to do that, of course, but it then allows them to do their own awareness without actually asking them to do that awareness. And then when you're going through it together, you can pull together those patterns. You can ask them about, oh, I noticed that you felt like this that day. Can you talk me through a little bit more about that? And your symptoms were this, and start to piece that together so they're becoming aware while you're also talking around food, which they're more ready for. Does that make sense?
Alicia, I just want to say thank you for hosting this webinar today. I've had a few clients recently who have come across, those testing kits, microbiome, and then they send away a sample, and then they get an appointment with a doctor or a naturopath doctor, and then all of a sudden they've got like 5 different supplements. And I find it quite challenging because often I've worked with them before and we got to a really good space where they've alleviated their symptoms. But then suddenly they feel like, there could be more that they could be doing. And how would you navigate that space? Or is there a way where we could maybe prevent them going down the pile of like 7 different supplements every day?
Yeah. So hard, isn't it? And really like tricky because there's so many things that you don't want to like just cut into and tell them that it's BS from the get-go. And you also want to save their money and time and all those things. Like, you're a helper, right? And so you're just like, oh, I just want to fix this, and I help them. And that includes telling them when something's not true or not correct or validated, all those things. However, if they've already done it or keen to do it and not going to get swayed any other way, my recommendation is to hold off on that really abrupt assessment. And instead just take some time to listen about, okay, that's really interesting. I love that you've, been exploring this a little bit more. Can you tell me why you did this and what you're hoping to get out of it? Were there still symptoms? Were you hoping for a little bit more clarity? Just working through what success looks like, because there's obviously some still things there that you're still interested in or curious about or worried about. And then from that, you can then launch into what you feel is best to chat through from the results or from the results that are yet to come. Most of the time with these things, it's also about weighing up that risk versus reward, right? So if you head in and go, and they've started to feel better or they've started to implement those results, and you tell them it's BS, you've lost that relationship straight away, right? They're like, well, that dietitian doesn't know anything. I'm going to trust this Instagram follower or this test result way more because that has data, it has fancy graphs, and it told me these things that were really concrete, and people love concrete information. So listen to what that has been recommended from the results first before you then work out what's the risk versus reward. Is this really risky? Is this going to do damage? And how can I navigate this? Because sometimes those tests just tell them to have more veggies, for example, or sometimes it's like really specific, and it's okay to say, oh, there's really not much evidence for that, but if you're feeling better, let's navigate what that means to you in your day-to-day and where we might be able to, listen to that versus when it may not be beneficial to you. And so you're spending a whole lot more time listening before preaching or like sharing your knowledge, because you're then allowing them to be the experts in their life. Does that make sense? And you can just still hold that space of expert in nutrition, Maddie, but it just takes a whole lot more listening and patience and feeling a bit triggered as well.
Yeah.
Like really frustrated. Yeah. But this is something that will continue to come across. If you get them while they're considering having these tests, I feel like we're in a different place. If they're just in consideration and wanting you as the source of information to say, whether that's worthwhile or what you thoughts about it, I feel like that's a bit more of an open question where you can weigh up. First of all, it's still the same question of like, well, what would you hope to get out of it? What have you heard so far? What are your thoughts? And then you can go through, okay, well, this is where we're at with the evidence and where we're at in like how we would see those results and how we probably wouldn't be able to use them. Now, what are your thoughts? Because you can't stop them from doing the test, but you can be that navigator of information and BS filter for them if they're just considering, and you're their safe space, I guess, in that area. So yeah, a little bit different depending on if they're considering it versus if they've already done it.
Is it okay for me to add something there too, Leash?
Yeah, please, Kirst.
My experience with the microbiome testing is that there are some companies that are better than others. And so I think that there is that opportunity in that pre-testing situation where if you do a little bit of research on some of the options out there, you might be able to provide them with some ideas around some testing options that do provide quite a zoomed in and accurate report on what their symptom profile is and compare that to the actual data that they've found in large databases. So I think that there is like ever growing research and information out there on the microbiome. And I think if they already sort of already done the testing, you do offer that extra level of practical component. So you can kind of talk them through like, well, this is what the report, even though you may not be trained to interpret the reports, you can kind of extract information out of that and apply it into their context and make it easier for them to implement. And as Alicia mentioned, I think weighing up whether that's something that's going to make a big change for them when they may have already seen a lot of improvement. And also weighing up whether there's potentially that harmful fixation over food and the risk associated with that.
Yeah, I love that, Kirst, because I think that's the piece, right, is that there's so much emerging. There's so much we don't know. But if they're going to do the tests, then let's ensure that they at least get the practical side out of it and reduce where possible the morality that sometimes comes through those tests. It's similar to a DEXA scan, right? Where if a DEXA scan report is horrific, it shows a terrible image of your body. It shows all these numbers in green, red, all these things. And my preference would for that person not to see that report at all and just have the discussion elsewhere with me about what the report is, what it said, and what it means. But often they're seeing the report, panicking, or looking at those numbers without a full awareness. Whereas you can then come in and go, okay, let's take a breath. Let's actually look at what this really means and then move forward with a bit more of a plan of what we can do or what's worthwhile doing or taking from this report. So I think we can do that with a lot of different areas of nutrition. I think just be really careful not to be really fast to dismiss, because that's a really surefire way to lose rapport with someone. That's a really good question, Mads.
Thank you, guys.
Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I'm aware of time and we are bang on. So after this session, Kirsten and I will do a bit of editing to the video. We'll email that out. I'll also include any other resources that we think might be relevant to you. And thank you so much for joining. Kirsten, have I forgotten anything of what to add or anything else information-wise? If you aren't a member of the Academy, I should say this because Dan will be upset otherwise. Highly recommend. We've got an option that just includes like the basics for $10 a month, for the reason of just like a big focus with the Academy is just to build community. And then you can build upon there in terms of the memberships if you are interested in more of the in-depth modules and information seminars that we have with our experts each month as well. So would love to see everyone join. It's a really fun space, and the questions at the moment and the conversations at the moment are really, really cool. So I'm very grateful to all our members and also the vulnerability of our members too. So if you're not a member, please reach out, because I'd love to see as many people joining as possible. And I'm not biased at all. Thanks, team. And Kirst. Thanks, Karen.
I don't think I have anything else to add. We could talk about this for hours though.
I know. So we nearly did too. We nearly did. Hey, does anyone actually, I'm going to ask the crowd, does anyone know the actual functional piece of what creates the butterfly feeling in your stomach when you're nervous? Because Kirsten and I didn't know. Does anyone know? Nah. Now it's a question I need to solve though. I'm like, what?
It's got to be something to do with actual nerves in my thought process.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirsten. So wise. Feeling nervous.
So not an expert in this field. No, does personal experience count? I feel like that counts for something, doesn't it?
Totally. I really need to work it out. I ever since I've had this question now, I'm like, it's actually really interesting how connected the brain.
Oh, I didn't end up seeing what ChatGPT said. I'll have to check that.
Right. You might need to include it in the email update.
Just for a little laugh at the end.
I know. I just am fascinated. And also ChatGPT probably comes up with some random thing that's not correct. So let's have a look. Thanks everyone for joining. So nice to see everyone's faces, and we'll chat very soon.